Well, apparently they don't want to be passed
Yes.
out.
They said they're getting more comfortable in the box.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Actually, probably the closest is to go here and go across the breezeway
Okay.
into the lobby of the hotel. Okay? Uh-huh. Hello. Hello. Come on in. Come up toward the front so we can take part in all this wonderful discussion we're going to have today. Here's the evaluation form. If you would fill that out at the end and just, you can drop it on that back table and give it to me. Okay. Thank you. Great.
So it's not like church. Is there something you like, do you say?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Community college, something like that. Well, a lot of good, and when you make rules that apply to one set group and another season, and they did it for themselves, then I get a lot of push for people enrolling with our community college. You know, it's really hard to keep kids in.
Pastor Willie, well, I mean, listen, I've been trying to get you all morning. You keep, I see you over there. But then I came upstairs to look for you, so you were snatching or something. But then next thing you know, you were over. Oh, well, you speak. Good, how was it?
Thank you very much.
You're sitting over here? Absolutely. Right, exactly. So, I think We can do that too. Yeah, we put it on.
Please fill that out and give it to me or just lay it on the back table.
But of course.
Yeah. Is Thomas sitting here? I'll set these here for you. I'll set these if anyone comes in on the round. That way they wait on a rough floor.
Oh, I was wondering. Yeah, we usually always come. One member. Somebody else did.
Thank you, I appreciate it. You got enough tape?
I'm good, thank you.
Good job.
Did anyone, you need a handout? That's all right. There you go, thank you. Donka from Montgomery County. She is with the May Board of Directors, and she is responsible for bringing Mr. Murphy. Judy?
Hi. I just wanted to have a minute to speak with you. I'm chairing the Black and Hispanic Caucus. Many of you may know that already. And we've had some workshops, wonderful workshops around the state. And we started with Frederick County, and then we had one in Montgomery, and then one in Anne Arundel, and another in Baltimore County. So if you have any programs that you think are exemplary and that really help students, we would be so delighted to have you host us. And we would come to you, and we usually do these on Saturday. So if you have anything, keep that in mind. And the reason I wanted to say something today was because of the comments that we heard this morning in two of the workshops. I think most of you were probably at these workshops. And Kathy Gemberling showed us all these charts and how to do the statistics that really show where kids are. And of course, we've always known that African American Latino kids, even if they were so-called middle class or at the same economic level as whites and Asians, didn't do as well. And she pointed that out on the screen because we found that out in Calvert. But we never had statistics to show that. And we know that other students haven't done very well. We're very aware of that. But this is an interesting point that she brought out. Then there are other points that she brought out about how to look at teachers to see whether they're effective and whether they are having learning the way they would like to have it. And Montgomery County had the highest rate for graduation for black males. We're thrilled. We think that's wonderful. Baltimore County was number 4. But I had a question from our community. They graduate, but what are they prepared to do? So we have to think about all of those things as well. And I also thought the statistics that Dr. Lowry showed us, that we take 100% of the kids in 9th grade, and 73% graduate, 31% go on to post-secondary, probably most of them 4-year schools, and they end up with only 19 graduating within those 4 years. And she was pointing out the fact that we really need to prepare these kids so well that they can compete in the world as well as in this country. I didn't agree about the McKinsey study that said that our top 10% of graduates, when compared to the graduates of other countries, don't do as well. I just can't accept that. And I do believe that we do educate everyone, whereas the other countries put a lot of money into the ones that they're working on. And our people are very creative. So just had to say that. And I also thought the part, which is having to do with career and college readiness, is so important for us. And we do know that we send kids to college and they have to do remedial work. And of course, she's saying we need to really work on that. So all of this is sort of an introduction to Mr. Murphy, who has worked with us before. And he's in charge of dropouts and suspensions and expulsions all over the state. He doesn't cause those, but he does certainly cause
Not
them.
in charge of the track.
Wait, he'll tell you what the real title is. So I'm just really so pleased to have him be here with us. This is he came with us last year, and that's why we have this bigger room, because we have a lot of things we need to talk about. So thank you for letting me editorialize. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. I feel bad when you call me Mr. Murphy, because as an elder, I feel like you should just call me Robert or Bobby or whatever my mom and my family. So don't.
And your Aunt Lola.
Yes, and my mom, which she knows very well. A little bit about my background. I am at MSC. I am the specialist for school completion and alternative programs, which is the pretty name for dropout prevention and alternative programs. A lot of my job deals around disconnected youth who were disconnected through academics, disconnected through attendance, and disconnected through suspension. And suspension has been one of my babies for a while, because quite frankly, the Robert Murphy you see here at 42, at 16 spent this whole 10th grade year on suspension, whether it be in school or out of school. So this topic to me is both a personal crusade and I think the right thing to do in general. So let me move on. Actually, no, before I start, can we just go around and say who we are, where we're from, starting here?
I'm Rose Crumpleton from Howard County.
forward in Baltimore County.
Carla Halsey, which is Ellen Flynn Giles, Howard County.
Marco Gill, Somerset County. I'm with May, with the school officer, Debbie Womack.
George Abner, Carolina County.
Shirley Brandon, Montgomery County.
So it's just K&A, we just kind of put it on there, right here.
Maxine Woodward, Precisions.
Attorney Johnson of Wade Farms.
Tom Carter, Garrett County. Jim Bishop, Dorchester County.
Lorraine Newby, Dorchester County. Ann Peterson, Charles County.
Cindy Down, Garrett County, but I'm a field personnel worker in Allegheny. So suspension and attendance.
Yes.
Alternative program.
Yes.
County Neal and Harrington. Edith Hawkins, the Regional Education Rep.
Ron Willie, Wycomico County.
And Walker Black.
Karen Washington, St. Mary's County.
Okay. And would you like to announce where you're from, or would you guys?
Karen Marshall, Washington County.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for saying where you are, where you're from. Build the lines of connection even within this room. I am presenting that you guys are doing some wonderful things across the state. We were just at a meeting recently in Frederick, or about suspensions, but Captain Hartsock was talking about the things you guys Frederick is doing around suspensions and how they create essentially a 1 year or even 2 year kind of task force, internal task force to look at BHG suspensions. So there's some great things that are happening in Maryland. But I will get to some other things out in Maryland as well. So our learning objective is to examine the recent reports released by the Maryland State Board of Education, to examine Maryland suspension data, examine Maryland Public Schools discipline interventions, to have fun and share. With me, when I present, I like it to be a dialogue. If you have something that is burning in your heart, in your head, whatever it is, please just raise your hand or just say, hey, Robert, what about X, Y, and Z? I believe it should be a dialogue. I know maybe it's because I got ADD or something like that, but I can't sit here for an hour or 2 hours and just have somebody talk to me without occasionally nodding or needing a peppermint or whatever it is. So please just jump in whenever you need to. So how did we get to this point in Maryland? There's been a lot of conversation about discipline in Maryland and discipline. How did we get here? Does anybody know? Yes.
I think there was a 9th grader who didn't receive services when he was suspended.
Yes, there was a young lady about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, by the name of Tanya. I don't know her first name, but she sued her local board of education because she had sporadically gotten homework and it was sporadically turned back, and she did get grades. I think she fell behind, and so she was really concerned. So it made it to the state board, which the state board eventually ruled, I think 5-4, or maybe help me if I'm wrong, 5-4, or something like that. And the real concern was about educational services and or even suspension. In a larger context, though, this conversation is happening nationally. So you had, we were at a conference about maybe 2 years ago. It was the USDE conference, and Secretaries Duncan and Holder were there. And there was a lot of concern about the discipline data that they saw nationally. And there were a lot of concerns in particular jurisdictions where there were some real challenges, some of the larger urban districts and even some of the suburban districts where there were really challenges. So that's kind of how we got to the point in Maryland. And also we produced a number of reports, which you'll see later on. So kind of some real quick things, because typically people associate discipline with school violence or problems in schools. Liquor school violence has been on the decline since 1990. Declines coincides with national data that crime is declining. And in fact, school is the safest place for kids to be, not the unsafest place or even a high unsafe place. History of school shootings. I know we had an issue recently in Baltimore County. I hope that the families are okay, and I hope that the young man is okay. And kudos to the guidance council who stepped in and stopped this from becoming a serious melee. But the history of school shootings, largely in suburban or rural communities, largely committed by white males, and minorities are specifically impacted oftentimes by the school violence. I see some questions on faces. People are, is everybody okay? Okay.
Explain what you mean, Robert, when you say there's specifically impact the Black and Latino groups. more so than the school as a whole when the shooting occurs?
Oftentimes, things happen in wherever the jurisdiction is, and oftentimes what happens to particularly Black and Latino kids is we have, okay, they're going to wear uniforms, they need to go out with metal detectors, they need to do all these different things. Oftentimes when things happen at other schools, that isn't always the response. There might be initial, like, oh, we need to do something, but oftentimes those things kind of just fall by the wayside. When you look at particularly African American urban districts, oftentimes kids are forced to wear uniforms. Like I said, the security cameras, they got to walk through airport metal detectors, they might get winded. I know for me personally, as a young man growing up in Detroit, when I started high school in 1984, I walked through an airport metal detector, and I got winded, even though nobody had been shot at our school. Now, I'm not going to lie and say nobody brought weapons in. But the weapons oftentimes were not related to school, they were related to getting home from school or getting to school.
But your point is they're impacted in other areas.
Yes.
You're not saying they're impacted specifically in the school beyond what other students are impacted, or are you saying that?
I'm saying that they are impacted to an extent because I think policy-wise, so again, the whole uniform movement, let's just use this as an example, okay? I'm not picking on Baltimore County, but I live in the city and I'm just gonna use Baltimore County as an example. So my daughter, when she started high school, she goes to a city high school. One of the big issues there was, okay, well, kids don't wear, kids need to wear uniforms. And the issue was safety, the issue was they can't afford the clothing, yada, yada, so on and so forth. When she looked at Towson High School, which is, I think, Towson Lawn Academy, that wasn't even a conversation, even though there are fights at Towson, there are drugs at Towson, there are all these different things at Towson that happen. They happen in both schools, but the difference is, policy-wise, we say oftentimes to the other schools, you have to wear uniforms, we want it to be safe, all of those things. So that's what I'm saying, when I say they're impacted, that's what I'm talking about. If you look at the two schools, the same things happen in the schools, but one particular group is looked at as having, let's say, wear uniforms or whatever it is. Are we clear?
Well, the uniforms are for everybody in the school, not just for some.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay.
But are you trying to make the point that, like, when that shooting happened out in the Midwest, they didn't talk about wearing uniforms?
Yes, yeah. We don't have those conversations particularly when things happen. I know that there was an incident in Baltimore County. I don't want to speak for Baltimore County. Somebody's here if they would like to speak. They can. If not, that's fine. So you got your hand up? Okay. What ends up happening is, again, these kids are, particularly in urban areas, are forced to wear uniforms, go through metal detectors and all those things, even though we have not seen the violence, the school shootings, the things like that, they're impacted by, I guess, those policies. But I guess that's the point that I'm making. Yes, sir.
This is interesting to me. In Charles County, we have, in the last 5 to 6 years, become a majority minority school system. And I, as a board member, have had requests from parents
Yes.
for school uniforms. Why don't your schools have uniforms? We have a policy that is a voluntary uniform policy, and it's usually set out through PTOs, PTAs, and the principal, and it's a voluntary, we give it a name, it's a positive reinforcement kind of thing, but we have been told by our lawyers we can't force the wearing of uniforms. So you're telling me that in some urban areas, they're being forced to wear them by whom? I didn't think it was legal.
And here's the part where I think that conversation is. So at the policy level, which is the board level, I would agree, but we have principals who are in schools who are very clear that if you do not wear your quote-unquote uniform, there are consequences. And I'll give you examples at my daughter's school. So if you don't wear your uniform, you go to ISS. I understand. I understand what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying, but
this explains where some of the questions are coming from, because there seems to be some of our parents who have come from other counties are saying, I thought a school uniform was a really good idea, and I want to know why you haven't implemented it. And and I'll say, well, you know, 2 or 3 of our schools do have it. For example, Gustavus Brown has something called Patriot Wear, and you have your choice of wearing khaki skirt and pants with a certain shirt or a certain color shirt, but it's not required, and it's applauded by teachers and principals if you choose to do it. But we would never assume that we could get everyone to do it, and I thought it was a freedom of speech impairment. I didn't think you could do that, so that's why I'm asking.
I understand that, and again, perhaps there's a disconnect between the policy level, which are the state board members, I'm sorry, not state board members, but the board members and the principal. Because I know that in my daughter's case, I've talked to her friends, I'm an assistant coach on their softball team. You hear the stories of them going to ISS and all of these things around not having.
I hope not in Charles County.
In school suspension, I'm sorry, I said ISS, you didn't know what I, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the first one is county, we have that. Some of our schools do have uniforms, and once it's decided that that school is going to have uniform, it is mandatory that all of the kids, unless the parent would have to ask for a waiver and then go to another school or whatever. That if the kids are in that school and that school says that the policy for that particular school is uniform, they all must wear uniform. But we do, and I know what you're saying, because in certain parts of our county, especially like our specialty schools, they don't wear uniforms. Our real high performing high schools, like in Greenville, which is predominantly a more white area, they don't wear uniforms. So it's like when you go in the central, most of the schools in the central part are mandatory they wear uniforms.
I'm still,
Even the high schools.
I need to have a conversation with you later. I'm not sure you can do that.
I understand, I'm gonna go to you and then I'm gonna move past this.
And I'm wondering whether, I don't want to have uniforms defined as the negative way that the perception is, because historically and realistically, uniforms have been a norm. A lot of private schools have uniforms. And if you choose to go to that school, then you're accepting that. And whether it's a law or not, it's a tradition or it's a custom, but I don't like the idea of the uniform being the reaction to help to the safety issues, because I have had experiences where the uniform is a way of showing your pride and your support for the school and so forth. And it's not a negative, it's not a problem, it's not a negative, it's not a reaction to a shooting or some incidents. I mean, metal detectors are another thing, but I just don't want to see uniforms put, just generally in that category.
And there are pros to uniforms as well. I'm not suggesting that there aren't. I think when you start talking about uniforms, whether it be parochial schools or it be at private schools, let's take a school like Georgetown Prep. You've got a blazer, you've got a tie, you've got a dress shirt, you've got some slacks, you've got shoes, whatever it is. That symbolizes one thing. And to me, and I don't, this is just me as a former administrator and former teacher and all those things. A kid wearing a tie and a blazer and all those things symbolizes something different than a kid wearing a polo and some khakis. And I'm not arguing one way or the other. All I'm saying is that if embracing uniforms is fine, but we also have to understand that we have kids who are impacted by our embracing of uniforms. And I mean, quite frankly, talking to kids all over the state, you have issues where even the uniforms sometimes are actually even used in the negative. So you have kids who say, well, they wear red, so that's a crip school. I'm sorry, that's a blood school. And kids will attend that school based on the fact that that's a blood school or a crip school if it's a blue shirt. So just FYI, that's not necessarily the point of this presentation, but just FYI that these are some things that happen as it relates to our school shooting. Any other questions about that before I move forward? Okay. Zero tolerance has had very little to any impact on school safety. This is researchers. Despite an overall decline in violent incidents since 1996, over 90% of U.S. schools have implemented some form of zero tolerance. And research identified concern with zero tolerance and the impact on SES and minority students. So when we look at zero tolerance, zero tolerance essentially is kind of a technical response to an adaptive problem. Zero tolerance, it's a set consequences. There really isn't a whole lot of of movement or negotiation. Set form to manage, their document formal set perspective, set solutions is clear. When we have issues like suspensions or problems at school, oftentimes the definition of the problem is unclear. The solution and implementation requires that we learn something, and then solutions may also require some flexibility. So when we embrace zero tolerance, we're essentially saying, this is it, this. Whereas when we start dealing with young people, I think young people are more adaptive in that they're more fluid, more flexible. Oftentimes, if you suspend kids or if you dealt with kids, I mean, if you raise kids, oftentimes your kids will do things and you ask them why they do it, what do they say? And they truly, and they probably don't at that time. It just probably was a good idea at the particular time. So when we pass that, this is just the annotated code as it relates to the Code of Maryland, notwithstanding by any law, rule, regulation. I'm not going to read that whole thing. May not, any other employee may not employ corporal punishment or discipline in the Maryland Code. So now we're going to get into what the board said in the board report. How many of you read the Maryland State Board report? So basically, this is a synopsis of what was said. Basically, long-term suspensions have been, and these are proposed changes to regulation. Long-term suspensions occur between 4 and 10 days. Process of extended suspension or expulsion must happen by the 10th day. And minimal education services. And if disproportionality exists, a plan must be developed to reduce or eliminate it in 3 years. This relates to the purpose of the reports. School administrators believe that for the most part, they move in a timely and fairly thorough process, and that no changes are necessary to the statutes and regulations that govern the process. How many folks agree with that? Just by show of hands. One? So one agrees.
Depends upon how broad the phrase for the most part is.
Okay. Moving down to teachers. Teachers says suspension should be a consequence of last resort. They emphasize the critical importance of keeping students in school whenever possible and providing high-quality education services during the period of suspension. Does everybody agree with that? Yes. Everybody agrees with that, right?
If it's safe.
Unless somebody's dangerous, unless someone is a risk to themselves or others.
Parents and students emphasize the need to provide educational services during the time of suspension. They also provide anecdotal evidence of unfairness in the process, and advocates believe that the process is not consistently timely or fair. Anecdotally, they gave examples of such unfairness, which they assert require statutory or regulatory changes to the rates. This is just related to the suspension part, of changing the long-term suspension. The school system must conduct its disciplinary process in a timely, open way. The school system should provide its student representatives any document it intends to use at a hearing. Within 10 days of initial suspension period, the school system should complete the following steps. Principal makes a recommendation, superintendent or designee orders an investigation. Superintendent or designee holds a conference with the parent and student, and superintendent issues his decision. And again, these are proposed. We'll move past that. This is the state board statement. The governing general assembly, the department, and this board, as well as all educators in Maryland, have made a commitment to eliminate the achievement gap to graduate students who are college and career ready and to produce a sustainable, competitive workforce. To meet those commitments, for all students, we reiterate our belief that students should be in school, not out of school. If, however, non-school suspension is necessary, a connection to the school through provision of educational services is essential for the school as well as for the student. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
With the caveat.
With the caveat. What's the caveat?
Money.
Show me money.
It's gonna be more expensive. It has to be.
How so?
Because the classroom teachers who have been doing the work have to be substituted for by someone else. That's an extra staff person, that's an extra salary, it's an extra cost. It simply is. And there's gonna be paperwork, there's gonna be, I I'm just saying, some of us aren't getting maintenance of effort from our, so this is an unfunded mandate.
Okay. So you feel it's enough money? Why do you feel, you said because there's gonna be extra staff needed?
Extra staff are gonna be needed, extra facts and figures are gonna have to be maintained. There's a lot of paperwork that's gonna be involved to make this thing happen, and you've set up, time limits. So staff are gonna have to drop other things to deal with a compressed time schedule.
Okay. Someone else said, I'm gonna come to you, then I'm gonna, you have something to
No,
say?
I disagree.
Oh, okay. You disagree. Yes, sir.
Well, most schools, especially in the larger system, you have a group of kids that are constantly in trouble, constantly doing things, and you have provisions made for these students, such as we have an alternative school for these people that have suspensions, but we still need to educate these kids. So we have permanent staff in place to take care of these kids, and they rotate in. They're in there for 90 days, they go out and process of the 90 days they're there. 3 or 4 others might come in for infractions or something. But we're educating them, and we've got it in place so that these kids don't fall behind, don't lose out on anything, and when they get back into the classroom, they can pick up where they left off.
So is the unfunded mandate, is that the educational services part that you're speaking to now?
It has an impact, and if you speak to teachers, particularly middle school teachers who have complained bitterly to me, we have an alternative school, that the movement in and out is constant. It's 90 days one way, 90 days the next, and then back again. That it is a disruption to them as teachers to deal with it, and it's a continual rotation, so nothing is ever solved.
Do we have a criteria that sends kids to alternative ed? So like if there are set things you do if you pull a fire alarm, if you have a pistol, obviously that's safe-free gun schools act that would get you expelled. But do we have processes in place that will remove a student from the school and send to a criteria that they need?
But in response to this lady's comment, it's a costly process. Because for the school you mentioned, and ours is called Choices, we have people hired to work in that facility as well as a nurse, as well as an officer. So all of those are additional positions. And we do it because we believe students ought to stay in school and not be out of school and have a program. But you don't just get in there easily. You get in there when all other options have been utilized, and we still want you to be in school.
Okay. The bottom line is we need to educate these children. We can't send them home like they did in my day. And you sat home for 10 days doing chores, getting beatings every other day because you were home. You know what I'm saying? Those things are done.
Okay. Thank you. Hold on, we got comments back. Yes, ma'am.
Or we're gonna pay for it when they end up in our correctional system.
Right.
So we're gonna pay for it either way.
That's exactly right.
These aren't kids that continue to fail. These are mostly
Not all of them.
academic kids.
I completely agree.
And
You completely agree with the comment that we'll see him later on?
We'll see them later, and I would rather the money go to the school system. But please don't tell me what I have to do without the money to solve the problem. That's what I'm saying.
well, I guess.
Pay it now. Pay
But
it
it's still
now.
our responsibility to take care of those children, whether the money is there or
Well,
not.
nobody has to
It's
tell
our
me to take care of those children.
It's an unfunded mandate.
Okay. So moving on, before we get into the conversation really about suspension and codes, I think it's important to identify what our suspension codes are. So there are like 8 suspension codes in the state, and they get categorized as such. So attendance, these are the suspension codes. These are like the Maryland Records Manual, Class 7 101, Tardiness 102, Truancy 103. I'm going to give you kind of a real, it's actually in your information, so I'll move fast through these. So when we talk about minimum education services, there was a lot of talk was brought up. It was an unfunded mandate. Students must receive, this is from the board report, students must receive daily homework assignments from each teacher which shall be reviewed, corrected by teachers on a weekly basis in the terms of the student. Each principal shall assign a liaison between teachers and various students on out-of-school suspension to communicate weekly about homework assignments and related issues by phone or email with out-of-school suspended students. Is this the unfunded mandate? Yes, ma'am.
That's part of it. What are we doing for those teachers who are teaching in class, plus teaching these students that have been pulled, and then trying to grade something that they didn't teach because the kid was pulled out and put in alternative school? Something needs to be done, I think, about just period about discipline, because kids get away with too much. They then are sent off to alternative school in our county, and it's infinite wisdom. Build a brand new alternative school. Now, if you're going to a school that has all the whistles and bells, brand new, then one of the newest in the county, and you're in a class with 5 other kids and a teacher who smiles all the time because that teacher's got 5 kids, would you want to stay there or go back to your home school? Hello.
Anybody else comments? Okay. Does this word that's underlined, does this mean an extra staff?
Means extra work for the teacher. And extra staff.
It does?
It could.
It could. How many of you are building administrators or have been building administrators in the past? How did you manage to suspend? When you suspended a student, how did you manage it? Now, we're not even talking about alternative school. When you suspended a student,
The administrator or the team leader had to work with the teacher. The burden fell on the teacher if it were a suspension. Expulsion is a different matter if you have alternative placements.
okay. So how did you manage it?
The work was set, and when the student returned, there was available help to catch up work that was missed. If the student would indeed apply themselves to do that, you know, you can make all the help available in the world, but if I refuse to accept it, then the choice becomes my choice. But if we don't provide the avenue for help, then I think the responsibility rests with us.
Who else was the principal administrator? Yes, sir. How did you manage the suspension process?
Well, I've gone through all stages because I've been an administrator a long time. When I started out, you could paddle.
Okay.
And I would tell you, I would give the kids a choice. You can be paddled or suspended. Do you know what 95% of them take? To be paddled. Go right back to class. And then they went on about their business. So, but that's a time long ago.
Yes.
It's never going to come back. Whether it worked or not, it's irrelevant. But we provided work for students to take home and return when they came back from suspension. The problem came in, you went through stages. First, they weren't going to get any credit for that. Then they were. I've been down the road with all of those things. Obviously, if you're going to give it to them, then they should get some credit for it. The first thing you try to do is to be careful with the suspensions so that you don't give them out unless you really need to. The other problem you have is with special ed students. That's a whole different ballgame, a whole different category, and we do a lot of different things with them. But my experience over the years is that you have the same small group that you suspend. I mean, I did a study once in the middle school that I had. Out of 690 kids, 33 kids got 50-some% of the suspensions. And those were the same ones. Those are the ones that you need to work with, and those are the ones that I think Maryland has failed with its constant reduction of mental health money in this state. It's just easier to pretend that mental health situations are getting better, despite the fact you see people roaming on the streets that obviously should be someplace with help. But because we don't have all the mental health services, what you do have, you try to get parents lined up with. But first you got to care about the kids. My success with kids was that I cared about them and they knew that. One of the disadvantages of that was that because I was effective with him, I got more.
Yes.
That's not always the reward that you're looking for. If he can handle them, so we'll put him in his school.
And I think you make a fair point. And the only reason I asked the question for former administrators is because when I suspended kids when I was in my school, I went to classroom to classroom, teaching teachers, they gave me so-and-so, so-and-so. And that was before we had online stuff, so kids can tap into their classwork if they miss them, if they're absent or whatever it is. But essentially, as the assistant principal, I was a liaison. And it was my responsibility for gathering their information. Now, we can argue about whether or not, we might need another position, but I think historically we've managed it by assistant principals who are normally responsible for discipline in schools. They are the ones who gather the information together. They're the ones that give it to the mother or the father, or whoever it is, or they give it to the student. So, even as it relates to unfunded mandates, we've been managing it kind of in a way that hasn't been funded in the first place, other than the positions.
But don't lose sight of the fact that because we loaded the wagon with something else, and the person kept pulling the wagon, that there comes a point where the wagon gets so full that a lot of the things on it don't get the attention that they deserve and should have. And I know I hear about these unfunded mandates and how we're able to manage. We're managing because people are pulling a heavy wagon, giving far more time than ought to be expected. They have families and whatever else. So I get a little worried when I hear people talk about, well, you've been able to do it, so it must be possible. It's possible only because we've got committed employees who've gone far beyond what should be expected to try to make things happen because they care about kids.
And I don't disagree with you. Again, my only point is we're looking at three different generations of administrators. And my point is that in meeting the educational needs of the students who have been suspended, each one of us, I was assistant principal as recently as 2003, each one of us did exactly the same process. So essentially, we were, using the state board's language, we were the liaison.
I agree with that.
And in most cases, and I don't know everybody's school system, but in most cases, assistant principals are the ones who are managing typically the behaviors. So, moving forward. So we talk about educational services. Of the 93,000 kids we suspended last year out of school, I'm sorry, 93,000 admits. It was 93,000 students. We did not provide educational services in over 70,000 of those cases. Now, this is what was reported to MSDE. So this is extracted directly from a report that MSDE produces. So roughly 22.5% of our students who were out of school suspended received educational services. And that could be a teacher coming to the house, school systems using home and hospital as kind of a supplemental thing, kind of get the kid on track until they come back to school. That could be a kid who's suspended and you give them a folder. But regardless of the case, and regardless of what happens, 77.5% did not receive any type of educational services as they were suspended out of school. We only had seven kids, 7 out of 93,000 students, 7 refused educational services.
I don't understand. I mean, now you're saying they refuse the services. That didn't seem to be the scope of your explanation of the numbers that are there.
What I'm saying to you, in contrast, we had 7,000 we did not provide any educational services for. And in the case of the gentleman over here who said they need to take responsibility and own it, we only had 7 cases in the state that they said, I don't want it. I don't want the educational service. 7 out of 93,000. Events, yes.
events. That's
Yes.
different than students.
That's different than
Make sure
students.
we understand.
Very true, very true.
Because
Very
it's
true. We got teachers
talks
who say it all the
about
time.
the percentage of students in his school that fell, and that could represent one student with 20 different events.
But,
And how long is this suspension? Because if it were for a day or two, you might not.
the beauty, or the lack of beauty, as it relates to our data collection, is we don't necessarily collect how long kids were suspended.
Yes.
So that's problematic. But,
Yeah, that-
but, if a kid's suspended 1 day, 2 days, 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, was that too loud again? I got in trouble last year because I was too loud.
Reggie isn't here, is he?
Was that too loud?
Reggie isn't here, is he?
Oh, okay. So getting back to the slide again, so we look at this number, it is 70-some thousand events. I think that's an important number. But the reality is statewide, we suspended 67,000 kids. And I'll get to that slide a little bit later on.
And could you tell me how long those students were being suspended for?
No,
You don't?
we don't collect that. But
So
the
it could have
purpose,
been a day.
yes, anywhere between 1 and 10 days. But here's where the question lies. Even if it's 1 day, and we are putting a folder together and giving it to Rose and saying, Rose, and I know Rose, you didn't get suspended. I got suspended. So we're giving it to Robert and says, Robert, you bring this back when you return the following day. And the majority of those cases, we didn't do that. Yes, these are all out of school suspension. This does not include alternative schools or in-school suspension. Yes.
If it's only for a day, you can't even get the work from the teacher before, so that may be part of it.
Right, they're already back.
How many of you use electronic systems to manage your classwork? So you have websites where your kids can tap into, and they can, if they're asking for a day, they can pull down their homework?
Yes.
Okay, so just about everybody has that. Okay.
So then why do you have to give them a folder? They should know.
It's possible to give a folder. I was using the folder as an example for us. But my point is that regardless of how we lay it out, it didn't happen. And 70,000 cases, yes, ma'am.
Within the 7, you said refuse services. Do you include the kids who you gave the folder to, but then they returned and didn't do any of the work? So they didn't refuse the folder, but they didn't do any of the work. That's not included in those 7. They accepted the services, but they didn't do anything for the services they were given.
Yes, that's not included. That is strictly, I'm not saying, when I leave the building, don't give it to me, I'm not doing it. Teach, shut it, whatever they say. But I suggest to you again, regardless of whether it's online, in person, in notebooks, in folders, and whatever, in most of the cases we didn't provide.
I find that hard to understand when you just have a room full of people saying that this is online and they can go and see what their assignment was. How do you say it's not provided? It's there. Now, whether I choose to do it or not is a whole different scenario.
And perhaps the question is process and report. Because if you do have it online, if I haven't told you or said to you, your homework's online, go get it and bring it back, you're suspended. My assumption is you could say as a administrator that I provide educational services. But again, these are things that report to NSDE. And perhaps, I'm sorry, I'm gonna come to you in 1 second. And perhaps again, the question is process and definition and how we define this. Yes, sir, I didn't cut you off.
I'm just trying to figure out how NSD is using this information. I just don't see the validity in the use. When I look at the other side of the choice, what all of those other factors of, because I know for our school system, each student is giving handbook, this, that, parent pieces. I just don't see the use of this data going or coming back from MSC. And I'm not sure if it's even effective or valid when it looks at what we're doing school system wide. So I'm just struggling with that. It's information, and I'm not sure if it's information that's of use for us in our county, or it's just information.
Perhaps the question is, in your county, we need to understand the process, because the other piece is this information that I am reporting right now comes from your counties. And so this is nothing but what I extracted from the report that we provide.
Is that a requirement from MSDE to say it there, or is it just something we're giving you?
I did not have the slightest clue as to what the
Right, because that may be just information we're giving that we're just wasting our time on giving, and it's not getting to the core of what we're dealing with on our level. I don't know.
I'm going to come to you right here.
I keep listening to everybody say everything is available online, even for the one-day suspension, and it's simply not. I'm a part of the school systems, and it's simply not. You do not have every daily assignment online. As a teacher, you may put your weekly topics that you're going to be discussing, but in terms of a homework assignment, that may not be posted online in advance or something like that. So I just wanted everybody to be aware. Everybody's saying it's all available online. Be very careful. You may want to go back and check what's actually happening.
Yes, sir.
And for all you counties that live in the city, in the urban areas where computer access, internet is so volatile and so easily accessible, come to the rural areas where we still have dirt roads yet. We still have people living in, don't have plumbing in their houses. Okay, some of these households these children live in don't even have a computer. We are trying now to partnership with Comcast so that we can get computers in students' homes at a minimal fee of like $10 a month and get a computer for $100 a month so they have access to Power School that we have, or homework, or $100 period so that they have access. So the fact that these kids that don't have access, they're not providing it, saying go online and get it. With what? What am I going online with? How do my parents only have one car. I can't get to the local library because I live 20 miles from the local library. How do I even get this information? So that's where an additional process needs to be put in place to allow these kids to have access to that homework when they get expelled. So when it says educational not provided, I see that, I get that.
And depending on where you are in the state, I'm sorry, man, I told you to go ahead, I'm before I go.
Yeah, pretty much I want to piggyback on what he was saying, because although in Prince George's County, a lot of we have that process in place that if our teachers want to take, they want to use that, they can go online. But we do know that a lot of teachers don't use it, okay? And when you, especially at elementary school level, and we do have kids that are suspended in elementary school level, they very seldom do you find that the teachers would actually put assignments or homework online. But I agree that that number is probably more correct than you think, and maybe even higher, because I do know when I was working in the school system as a parent liaison, we used to have to actually stay after the teachers to actually give us homework to get those kids suspended. And a lot of times, we didn't even get it till the child is about ready to come back to school. So I do know that number is probably even higher than what is on here now.
On we've been submitting suspension data for years. Every year to the state. We submit our suspension.
Since 1974.
This is nothing that they've asked for.
Yeah, this is not anything new, but I think the important point for me is, again, of all these events, we're not necessarily providing the educational services. And how we determine, and I think that actually is will be part of our conversation with code of conduct, and all of those things, is I think we'll be trying to define what educational services actually is. Because it's kind of a nebulous term that's thrown around, but we don't really have a very clear, so in educational services, a homework packet that we put together in a manila folder and give away is educational services. A home and hospital teacher coming to the house and doing, 6 hours of instruction a month, or a week or whatever. What exactly is educational services? And I think once we're able, and once we have defined it, then I think we can actually do a better job of assessing what it is. But regardless of what we agree and not what we don't agree, this is what schools are reporting to systems, and systems are reporting to us. So again, going back to numbers, only 22.5% of the schools in this state have said that they provide educational services when the students are suspended out of school. We have actually kind of already talked about this. New positions are not necessarily required to meet the liaison provision. Collective distribute homework assignments after the student has fulfilled the suspension. Liaison collects and distributes return homework to teachers for credit. Yes.
One question. When we talk educational services, what is the definition of that?
That's
what is that?
That's like I said. We are right now. Yes. We are right now. MSE is got a few different balls in the air as it relates to this concept and suspension, code of conduct, discipline, and merit. So on one hand, we're going to host the discipline conference. December 14th is the date. On the other hand, we're revisiting the code of conduct. So that will be opened up. If you are interested in participating on that committee or task force or work group, whatever you want to rename it, I'm actually the chair. So if you leave, please leave your information before you leave your information and come to me and tell me that you would like to participate. I'll put you on the listserv and we'll invite you to the first meeting, which I think is scheduled for November 27th. And then the other side of that, there are two other projects that are going on. We're looking at best practices around managing suspension and alternatives to suspension. That's another group. And then we're having the Regional Educational Laboratory, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Educational Laboratory, do some research for us as it relates to disproportionality and whether we have a problem. So, as we talk about educational services or providing educational services, I'm going to move to something real quick that's important to me. So, even as it relates to when we suspend students, the suspension is a lawful action. So, to some extent, we still should be providing makeup work in pretty much all the cases, or most of the cases.
You mean after the student returns back?
It is considered a lawful action. So if you suspend a kid for 9 days, he is absent,
9 days.
excused.
And he has 9 days to make up the work.
He has whatever time you give him to return his work.
No,
Yeah.
you are allowed the same number of days you were out to make it up.
Yes.
Someone could do more than that, and you certainly are allowed at least the same number of days you were out to make up the work.
And one of the things we heard from teachers when they testified was that it was hard for them because when we suspend kids out of the building, then they got to do double the work. So just FYI, as we have this conversation on suspensions. So at the table for about 5 minutes, kind of share what your suspension process is. How do you manage suspension? What are some of the things you do? Educational services. What do you do in your system to actually provide those things? If you know. 5 minutes. That's you don't watch this and then it's also talking about how staff is like it's oftentimes it's placed in so by this is but you gotta hang on to them, so it's a global hopefully the report will release first and not back to the house. Thanks for
respond to changing circumstances.
Okay, go wrap up in like 1 minute. Anybody care to share what they talked about at their table? Or would the locality like to share what they're doing? You're like me. I was a red zone kid, though. Would anybody care to share about what was talked about at the table, or what they're doing in their local schools? Anybody? Nobody? Nobody care to share?
But one of the things that we were talking about is flexibility, the ability to deal with these problems at the school level, and the fear that the state is going to mandate certain things and require us not to do certain things, and then how are we going to cope? Are you giving us the tools to help cope with these, and at the same time remain flexible enough to deal with problems at a local level? I think that one of the concerns that I have is that the worst thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that the state come up with some kind of quota system, that we are suddenly afraid to say that we've got this problem or that problem, and we're doing one of two things. We're pretending it doesn't happen while the school is falling apart, or we come up with some kind of thing that makes our conscience hurt while we've got them in a classroom that we're not designating as in-school suspension or anything else. And I hate to see us put in almost in the same thing that the testing program did. You know, we've seen a lot of the negative things that happened there because we didn't want to be late. You know, and that I just hate to see us go down and repeat the same mistakes. You know, I always thought very highly of the profession of education and that you wouldn't cheat. But you put so much pressure on people as far as failing schools go that you ended up with people cheating. I mean, and it's terrible that people had to feel that they were so desperate they had to go in and change answers on the kid's test in order not to fail. And so I want to be sure that we're not repeating the same thing, and others at the table have said the same thing, not repeating mistakes we've already made before.
Well, I will say this, unless someone else wants to chime in. I don't think that that's the belief or the philosophy of the state board. Certainly, I'm not on the state board, so I can't speak. But in speaking with people who are there, I don't think that that's the philosophy. I think that the concern is we have some challenges in Maryland, like we do nationally. It's not just a Maryland problem. And I think everyone is trying to find a way to make this thing work and meet all children's needs.
And the thing of it is, though, that sometimes these good intentions, as we have seen already, get translated into policies and procedures that lead to the very thing we're concerned about.
And I think it's important for you guys to continue to keep that dialogue going. And again, I would offer to you, as I said to you earlier, I'm chairing the Code of Conduct Committee. We're actually going to be redoing the Maryland Code of Conduct. And anybody that wants to participate, please come up to me afterwards and give me your information, and I'll put you on the list, and we'll include you in those meetings. The plan is to kind of do something, first meeting November 27th, and hopefully by January or December 2013 or January 2014, have something in place that we can present to the state board that kind of meets you guys' needs, but is what meets kind of some of the other concerns as well. Yes, ma'am.
I think the issue is really that the normal response to being told that you can't suspend out of school because you need to deliver services is to, okay, we won't do that, but are we doing what we need to do in order to deliver effective educational services to students who have displayed certain behaviors or are not able to, take advantage of the services that we have? So I think we have to look very carefully at what the response will be to this, because everybody will say, okay, we're not suspending them, but they're not getting any service in the class they're still in because they're rolling around on the floor or throwing things at the wall or picking up chairs or disrupting the class for everybody, and then nobody's getting effective educational services. And so it's a matter of looking at how to effectively deliver services that are appropriate to these children, just as they are to every child, and not get hung up on the number and hung up on the percentage and hung up on what this means, but in actually realizing results with children. We get so hung up on percentages and numbers that we stop looking at what we're really supposed to be doing. And we fall victim to, oh, well, this is a good school, they only suspended 3 kids. Well, that's because they locked 5 kids in the closet and didn't have to send them home. I mean, no, that's what happens. And then you don't have to check all the boxes, then you send them and send them home. And so what has to happen is a realistic examination of what kinds of services are most effective, what can we do within the infrastructure we already have without imposing additional burdens or artificial constraints on what the schools can do in order to meet the needs within their own community.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that we talked about a little bit, and I've been thinking about a lot this session and at the end of this morning session of the state superintendent, is something that hasn't been stated outright. And that is that we live in a day when local control of education is going out the window. And this mandate, whether it's unfunded or not, is a mandate. And it's part of the many mandates that local boards of education in this country have to live with, starting with No Child Left Behind, the testing mania, and I detect a lot of sort of resentment among my fellow school board members about that, about feeling that they weren't really consulted, knowing what really is going on in the schools by the state board and to the support. Several years ago, there was a task force, a state task force on multiple suspension. I was hired, I'm a journalist, and I was hired to cover that, and to write a report about it, and I did. And several of the things that came out of this, I think, that too, including the liaison suggestion. I think the report by and large just went on the shelf, and now here we are several years later with acting on it. So I don't know, I have mixed emotions about it myself, but I really detect that there, and of course maybe it's written a letter, diplomatically worded letter.
Yes, it was diplomatic. I'm gonna come here, and I'm coming to you next. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was very careful to table that sometimes for the students that we have to from the classroom and maybe put them in the alternative school, that's a chance for us to save them. I've observed that when students sometimes don't come in a properly planned alternative school program, students have a chance to recruit because there you have, at least in our case, more one-on-one, and they can get the attention that they need, whether it be math or reading. Well, you know what? That's what those kids really looking for. Because sometimes in the classroom, they're lost. And so therefore they start acting out. So just to know that that's one way, many times get them recruit. And then we found out that when you put them back in the classroom, you also need to do a follow-up with that child. Because they're looking for that one-on-one. And if we can work that for a while, many times you have to get on track.
Well, I appreciate that.
Hold on, Renee, but
I was just gonna say, fortunately or unfortunately, we live in a data-driven society. So the state board, has been receiving this suspension and expulsion report for years. And the numbers aren't changing, if anything, they're growing. And I think when the state board looked at multiple suspensions and the impact on minority students, they were concerned as they sat in the seat of being a state board member, what is actually taking place in the local school systems. That being said, the local boards are so very important and do enjoy a great deal of autonomy. And I think the state board tries in a way to be, and that's why it's guidelines and not mandates, but a framework. They're more the architects. You're the builders because you have the school buildings and the students. shining a light, and they discussed it over a 2-year period of the concern that they saw without any changes being made. And that's their job, is to drive education policy in the state. We prefer them to do it than the General Assembly. So,
I'm gonna come here and then we'll, you, go ahead.
In our group, we discussed some of the alternative programs that we have that exist in our school, where someone might be attached to a group of 4 or 5 students. They come to that person in the morning, they sign off that they got to school on time. They work with that person for 2 or 3 periods, and they go to a class where they haven't been in trouble. They demonstrate that they are not in trouble. Maybe they stay with their regular cadre through lunch or through PE class or some way in which they're being successful. And I particularly pointed out that the name of that program has changed over the years so many times that I can't tell you what it is anymore because we've gotten grants to pay for it. The grant ran out. We had to call it something else. We had to find funding from somewhere else. And in tough economic times, we haven't been able to keep it everywhere. So those are types of programs. And we also talked about community programs where they had a paid central leader, but maybe an elder from a church